BAM is a communications agency that believes stories move the world. We move stories forward for technology-driven brands that challenge, change, and create entire industries. Today on Dear BAM, we're talking to Lindsay Amos, who is the Director of Communications at Y Combinator. Lindsay is a communications professional in the technology industry with a knack for advancing company narratives in the down cycles between launches.
Everyone, we have the wonderful Lindsay Amos on the show today for Dear BAMF. Lindsay, we already chatted that you're from Y Combinator, which is basically, how would you describe Y Combinator actually to the masses?
I would describe it as the best accelerator in the world. So we provide seed funding to a large number of startups twice a year. And in return, we spend 3 months with them, giving them advice on everything from building their product to, of course, how to land stories in press and build a brand. After those 3 months, of course, we have long relationships with those companies all the way through IPO and provide them with advice, mentorship all throughout the lifetime of their company.
Yes. By no exaggeration, are you saying large amount of startups, because it's thousands. And so I want people to know that Lindsay does have a collection of like thousands of companies and the whole entire Y Combinator portfolio that she needs to communicate with, chat about their comm strategy and all that good stuff. So we have a good lineup of questions for you today, Lindsay.
Yes, they were great questions.
Let's read them for everyone listening here. So first one. Dear BAMF, I'm stuck with how to convince my executive team that we need a brand refresh. Yes, we're in the midst of this pandemic. And yes, we just raised our Series B. My CEO said, we raised all those millions with the brand we have. Why do we need to change it? We're a SaaS platform and very B2B focused, so it's not like we need to look like Nike. What advice do you have for conveying the why of a brand refresh? Just so you know, our brand was created by the CEO and COO 4 years ago. It's okay, but just not impressive. Lindsay.
Often when I work with founders, I work with them to outline the difference of how you talk to your company to an investor, or how you talk about your company to an investor versus how you talk about your company to the press or your customers or more of an external audience. So first, I would recommend to this person that they educate their CEO on the different audiences. Yes, you may have raised those millions with the brand you have, but whatever brand you were speaking about to investors, it needs to look different when you're talking to those who are external, those customers or press. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that this person also says, our brand's okay, but not impressive. It says who? Can you share specific anecdotes with your CEO about what you're hearing from the audience that does matter? What are you hearing from press or customers? Are they saying that your brand is stale, or they don't see the value, or it's not clear what your mission statement is? Coming to your CEO with specific anecdotes is going to be quite powerful. Second, I love data, which is probably surprising for most PR people because we hate to be tracked with like how many stories we land, et cetera. But data can be super important. Can you run any online surveys? Take a poll from current customers about how they think about your company, and then take that data. And if it is helpful for this brand refresh, bring it to your CEO and outline the results. That can have a huge impact helping you with this brand refresh. Third, it's interesting that they also say, we're in the midst of this pandemic. We sure are. And non-essential business needs are being cut right now. And so it may make sense for you to reposition your product so that companies understand why you are essential to their business. And that does mean a brand refresh. So again, this just takes your expertise. You need to clearly explain to your CEO about how this pandemic has impacted your brand and how that needs to change. So I think by clearly outlining anecdotes, data, and then also explaining the current situation with the pandemic, you have a better chance of convincing your CEO that you do need a brand refresh.
I'd add too, along the lines of that survey, because that was pretty much what I was going to mention, is when in the survey you ask people, oh, is it clear what we do? Can you tell what we do from just looking at our brand? Because that is what an icon, a brand name, etc., needs to convey in a very short time. Very short of like, oh, and of course with, let's say Nike, as the person is saying, you see the swoosh and like athleticism and achieving and being an incredible physical strength, let's say, or the associations that you think of. And maybe you don't want to be like Nike, but your brand should be able to convey, this is cybersecurity, or, oh, this is strength, this is power, or this is conversation, if that's something more. So if it's not doing that, and maybe you could find that in the survey results, if people are giving you all types of answers across the board, it's not really clear then. People are confused. And then confusion is definitely not good.
Completely agree.
Well, let's do our next question here. Dear Banff, I'm the internal head of communications at my startup, which now has over 100 employees. One of my executives expressed an eagerness to ramp up his LinkedIn thought leadership. So I brought on an outside agency we've worked with before to handle his account. So far, it's going great. And of course, now the 3 other executives want their own similar thought leadership program. The thing is, the one executive we've been doing this campaign with is super motivated, on top of things, and responsive to our agency. I'm pretty hard pressed to believe any of the 3 others will participate at the level they need to quote unquote be successful. What can I do to balance expectations? I don't want a situation where one of them comes back to me and says, well, that was a fail. Why did you convince me to do this? Lindsay.
I work with a lot of founders, and one thing I explain to them as they're starting to explore working with an agency is to make it really clear that you don't just hand over your comms and say, go run with it. Let me know when we see results.
Yeah.
You have to work very closely with that agency. And so for this person, as they work with various executives, they need to be extremely clear in what the expectations are, both as it pertains to their time commitment as well as what makes good content. And so I always love put it in writing, make sure that in writing it's clear exactly what that time commitment is.
Yep.
And then the initial brainstorm of what makes good content. And good content means that this person has unique expertise that they can share with the community, that they're bold. It's something that's going to be interesting, something that needs to be put out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that they've got personal stories, those personal anecdotes that they feel comfortable sharing and putting in writing. And so with that expectations, clearly outlining, this is how many hours per week we need from you. And these are your exact responsibilities. Maybe that means the first draft, participating in brainstorm sessions weekly, being able to review any edits within 2 business days. Then I would share with those executives how your colleague has been successful in landing great thought leadership pieces. For example, Jane commits 3 hours per week, holds 30-minute one-on-one calls with agencies, etc. And so clearly outlining again to those executives how their peer has become so successful would be really important. And if they're willing to invest that time in those types of commitment, then I say that this would be worth your time and you shouldn't spend more time trying to convince them this isn't a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Number one thing, get it in writing. What we'd even do is hedge for even more. So if you're like, well, Jane, she does spend probably only 3 hours a week, let's say, on like a good week, but I'm going to make sure that I can state it as 5, because then if it's less time, great. Someone who is really committed and wants to do it will be like, yep, I'm going to dedicate that. I can do that, and so forth. The second thing too, to your point, Lindsay, is you already have a test study. You already have someone to point to exactly. So if they've been doing a great job, maybe we're using a fictional name, Jane here, but maybe Jane can articulate or come from herself to say, hey guys, fellow peers, this is what I'm spending. I just want to give you a heads up. So now it's not you necessarily coming to them and saying, well, you're going to have to spend 3 hours a week or whatever, but instead use her as the spokesperson to convey to these others, hey guys, yeah, like sometimes I'm spending 6 hours a week. It's a lot, but look at all this great stuff I'm getting. Now you're kind of using this third party spokesperson who's educating them so they don't think in any way, shape, or form you're blowing it out of proportion or trying to soft serve it to them or anything like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about leadership or drafting your own articles is easy. It is not easy. And so having this executive who they respect be very clear with them about how much time they put into this area will be really helpful.
Yes. Love it when there's a case study, because then half of your work, I think, is done in terms of the convincing part. Okay, our next question here. Dear Banff, what's your advice? Oh, Lindsay, this is a perfect one for you. What's your advice on vetting a PR agency? There are so many, and I'm cautious about making the wrong choice as the final decision is up to me. I've worked with 2 others in the past I really enjoyed, but now I'm CMO of a startup that is not really a fit for my former agencies. Is an RFP even worth doing?
Good old RFPs.
Oh gosh, we see a bunch of those too. What do you think about this? I'm so curious.
I think in the beginning stages of you searching for an agency, an RFP is not going to be worth your time in the beginning. You will get much more by pulling your network and asking for recommendations. It sounds like this person, if they're a CMO, they've been in the community for quite a while. I'm sure their network has some great recommendations and can start those introductions to agencies. From there, I just like to line up introductory calls, or granted, this isn't possible right now, but meet up for coffee, sit down face to face. Does the relationship feel natural? Can you brainstorm together?
Yes.
Can they provide anecdotes of a situation similar to yours that they've been able to succeed in? And make sure that you're having these conversations with those that you'll actually be working with. Meaning, bigger agencies, a lot of times you'll meet face to face with senior level folks, but who you'll be working with on a day-to-day basis might be someone a bit more junior level. If that's the case, ask that senior level person bring the team that you may be working with.
Yes, always.
Anyone can provide a stellar RFP, provide great anecdotes. But in the end, for me, it's really a gut decision. Does this feel like a good partnership, relationship? Can we brainstorm together? And of course, data's good. Do they have examples of how they've been successful in the past? But in the end, relationships with your agencies are typically long-term, and you need to have that good gut reaction of, yes, this feels right. I'm going to be able to work with them, brainstorm with them, and see a lot of success together.
I always like to ask people, which is right in line with your saying, Lindsay, proof is in the pudding. Never listen to a PR team that's like, oh yeah, we can get you in this outlet, that outlet. Oh yeah. PR people are very good salespeople. So what you want to be able to look at and ask for while you're casually, let's say, culling your community, asking around, is go, oh, okay, hey, so these are maybe the outlets you want to get into. Let's say if it's that, or this is the type of content we want to get placed, or this is the type of social media campaign we're looking to do. Where have you and how can you show me that you've done that before? That's the biggest thing. What I will say too is, and this happens for us, is some people will say, oh, well, have you ever had an AI application platform that deals with space? Something where you're like, no, because you guys are the only ones who do that, right? It's so frontier, for example. But what you can instead point to is, but here's in rather a similar space, maybe it's B2B, it's enterprise. Oh, here's other clients that sell to the same type of clientele that we've worked with. So you can see that type of proof as a touch point to understand their work.
Yeah. I also think it's really helpful in beginning stages to understand how they like to best work with clients as well. And does that work for you? Do they ask for weekly meetings, face-to-face once a quarter? Also, what does that working relationship look like for you? And will that work for what you're trying to succeed and for the relationship that you want to foster with your agency?
That's a good follow-up question, because I am curious to hear, given the crazy array of startups you work with, Lindsay, what have you seen and what's a normal cadence, let's say, of communication from an agency that you'd see? And do you have an opinion on it? Or is it kind of up to, well, whatever works for the startup?
Yeah, it really depends on what works for the startup. I've seen some YC companies be extremely successful in their work with agencies because they get so involved in the work. They're actually emailing their agency partners with story ideas or interesting angles that they personally have. They're meeting in person once a quarter in order to brainstorm what the next quarter looks like. All this said, the most successful agency and company relationships I find are those that actively get involved in the work, meaning they get on the phone frequently. They act as if they're an extension of their own team versus forget to trickle down information to their agency partners. Frequent calls, frequent brainstorm sessions. And like I said, they act as an extension of their team and feel comfortable reaching out at any time with ideas.
Yeah, if you're not a partner in the trenches with folks, it can be rough. What we found, just being from like the agency perspective, is when your client contact, and this is why we never just have one, we have multiple, but when your client contact is doing what you're saying, Lindsay, of just kind of like, let me just protect information. Let me not tell you everything. Let me just kind of, I don't want to mention that. Like, just, you're not in it, in the trenches, as I like to say.
Yeah.
It's coming out partially. You're feeling like a vendor. It doesn't feel good to feel like a vendor. You want to be a partner. That's how we like to state it to our potential clients, is like, hey, if that's just how you want to treat us, like, you're a vendor. We talk to you every Thursday, and we 30 minutes, like, that's fine, but that's not going to work for us. So that whole like relationship prospect and how it is the foundation of that, really good to get up front to really know if you guys are going to be good for each other, both sides.
Right.
Yeah. So good. Okay, Lindsay, last question for today. Here we go. Dear BAMP, so I'm at a startup that has been a media darling for the last year. Honestly, I didn't need to do anything to have top tier press come to my inbox. FYI, I'm head of comms. Now that we aren't the hottest startup on the block anymore, the momentum of media has slowed down. My CEO, however, doesn't think we need to spend anything with an outside agency. What's your advice here?
I wish I knew what company this was.
I know. These are anonymously submitted, so I don't even know.
With the context that I do have, just these few sentences, I actually agree with the CEO. If you were the media darling for the past year, you have great relationships with top tier press.
You should, yes.
I also view communications as having peaks and valleys. And what I mean by that is peaks are your announcements, something where it's probably going to be easier to land coverage. You've got a very clear news hook. And then valleys. And that's the hardest part of communications. What are you going to do in the time between announcements, or the time between being a media darling? As someone who's running in-house communications, you know your company and your brand and your story better than anybody else. And hiring an outside agency isn't going to magically turn that knowledge into stories. I would encourage you to push yourself. Look at how your company has grown. What are some unique stories that you can offer, some unique data that you have? Instead of looking to an outside agency to get you back into the media, I would just encourage you to push yourself and figure out what's some unique data that you have, or some evergreen stories that you have that you can start to get into the press again. I was at Square for a very long time. And when we were 30 employees, we were constantly launching product announcements. It was the first time that we were even on anyone's radar, and we were very much the media darlings. Fast forward 2 years, our announcements weren't as sexy. It was pushing out, say, a small update that really impacted small businesses, but wasn't as interesting to the mass audience. And so what I started to do there was figure out what made Square unique and what were some interesting stories that we could tell that didn't have a strong news hook. So for example, telling more cultural stories at the time around why every email our CEO ever sent was shared with the entire company at the time, or why we thought it was a bug to have more than 8 engineers on a team, or how we used our in-house coffee shop as well as cafeteria to test all of our products and what that looked like. And on and on. Also being able to use data and work with our analytics team to figure out who are the best tippers in the US, or how did a winter storm impact local commerce in Atlanta. And a lot of those ideas, they come from you being so ingrained in the company and the culture. It's not something that an agency can just come up with for you. So before exploring an agency, I would explore what unique evergreen stories that you can tell. If you feel that there's a steady number of announcements, there's a lot coming in the pipeline, and you just need that extra help, then yes, of course, go through an agency. But I would encourage this person to follow the CEO's advice here and see what they can come up with.
The one thing, too, in this note, the person writes in and says, my CEO, however, doesn't think we need to spend anything with an outside agency. And I wonder if that's a media relations agency or any agency? Because to your point, Lindsay, of thinking beyond, I mean, obviously they wrote in talking about the media thing, but maybe it's a conversation of like, okay, yeah, you know what? Yeah, we have done all that media stuff. Right now, we're going to focus on content. We need to be on that content campaign. We have 200 plus customers we could totally show, but I just can't crank that all out myself. Let's think about how creatively we can do it. Hey, is there some agency that could help on that realm in that department? So maybe the conversation just isn't around, oh my gosh, the media's drying up. What's the Band-Aid? Let's try to get on the other agency. It could instead be like, well, let's focus on different type of storytelling, not through the media. Maybe it's in our own platforms. Maybe we want to do a big social campaign. And does that take extra ammo, extra power? We don't really know from this person. They say, I'm head of comms, but we have no idea if there's like a marketing team under her or him or whoever. So there might not be other resources on this person's team. So perhaps that's a way to totally just rethink where things are. You've had a great year with all the media coverage. Awesome. But now what else? What other realms can you do the communication through?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about own your own narrative, your own message. And interestingly, I wonder if the CEO is pushing back. You know, they of course saw how much media they landed in the last year. I wonder if they're talking to their head of comms, asking, we saw this media, why aren't we seeing the same amount now?
And why don't you just do it?
Right. And if that's what they're feeling, then I think there's also an opportunity here to educate their CEO, make them a partner in understanding the ebbs and flows of media, what we're seeing during a pandemic, and then the solutions that they can provide. If a agency isn't an option, then own your own content and what that looks like, but making it clear that that means probably less media coverage if they're going to be shifting their attention to their own content.
Yeah, and we don't have the full context here. That's the kind of...
I know.
We don't. We need more here, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for being on today. We covered a lot of ground. This was great.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Dear Banff, the advice podcast for PR and marketing pros like you. Our show was created by Banff, a PR and marketing agency headquartered in San Diego and New York City. The music you're enjoying today was composed by Tiffany Dizon, produced by Daniel Kessner, and played by San Diego Symphony's Art of Alarm. Thank you to our podcast production team at Citizen Recording. If you have a tough PR and marketing question you'd like us to answer, please write to us at bamtheagency.com/Dear Banff. Don't forget the F. We'll be back next Monday with another episode of Dear Banff. Until then,